My name is Brian Welle. I am the Director of People Analytics, which is one group within People Operations at Google. People Operations, by the way, is what we refer to as human resources, and I work out of Google's New York City office. I actually was a psychology major when I was at the University of Minnesota as an undergraduate student, and I had taken a couple of courses, one being abnormal or clinical psychology, and I thought that was fascinating, but what fascinated me even more was the psychology of everyday behavior, everyday interactions, and we spend a lot of our time at work. So after I graduated, I was looking for graduate programs to join, and industrial organizational psychology just seemed to, it just grabbed my interest because of all the different ways that we interact with each other, the things that we're doing, how we're feeling when we're in the workplace. So I went to New York University's Industrial Organizational Psychology program, and I worked with someone named Madeline Heilman, who does a lot of work on stereotyping, diversity, affirmative action, and that's pretty much what I specialized in during my graduate school experience. When I was sort of midway through my program, I worked at a company called Catalyst, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to understanding dynamics of diversity in organizations, and I loved it. I loved the content area. I loved applying research to real-world settings. And when I graduated, I worked there for a little bit more. Then I decided I wanted to go back and do core research at a university. So I did a 2-year postdoc at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where I did research on leadership and what does it take to effectively lead during times of public health and safety crisis. So if you're a leader during 9/11, or when a hurricane hits your state, or when there's a disease outbreak, what does it take to exercise amazing leadership in that time? So when my postdoc came to an end, I went to a conference called the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology Annual Conference, met a lot of people from a lot of different jobs and industries, and then I met someone from Google, and he described a role to me that was very ambiguous, but it was, generally speaking, applying all the research and statistical skills I learned in graduate school and through my postdoc at a company like Google, focused mostly on our staffing process. So how do we find the right people to hire? How do we ensure that we're interviewing them properly? All sorts of questions like that. So that's how I came to Google, and I've been at Google since 2006. And I've moved from staffing to tackle issues like diversity, unconscious bias, which maybe we'll talk about here. I manage the employee opinion survey and all sorts of other applications of IO research here at Google. Yeah, I think the greatest thing that people need to be worried about is that they already know how to make amazing decisions no matter what they're facing. So you're giving somebody a performance score, and you feel like you know what they performed, how they performed, what they did on the job, and you feel 100% certain that you can accurately assess that person's performance, and then you move to the next person on your team and you're doing the same thing. That is the way most organizations approach performance management. They roughly know what their jobs entail. They have to assign a performance score and give feedback. They feel like, I've seen this person perform, I know who they are, and I'm objectively qualified to actually provide that feedback. And the whole system works that way. People are receiving their feedback and their performance scores, and then they move on to the next cycle. It's that lack of structure that I think is the greatest detriment to doing this process as well as it could. The reality is, we're swayed by all sorts of things when we're making judgments about people, and they're not always objective. For example, I will be more likely to remember the latest thing that you performed rather than what you contributed early on in the review cycle, right? That's called the recency effect. I will remember this amazing thing you did a year ago, and no matter how hard I try, that just keeps influencing how I view you as a person. That's called the halo effect. Or on the other side of it, like you just bombed that one assignment, that one time, and it was really important to me, and I just can't get that out of my mind. Even if consciously it doesn't enter into my awareness, it's there lurking behind, and when I give you the performance score, it's subtly influenced by that. That's called the horns effect. Similarly, we can talk about different kinds of stereotypes. Stereotypes we have about women, about different racial ethnic groups, about what it means to be lesbian or gay at work, and the things that we think you're good at because you're a member of those groups. Though we may not be consciously aware of it, those stereotypes can exert an influence on how I evaluate your performance. So when you ask what is the one thing that I wish everybody working in an organization involved in the performance appraisal system would realize, is that they are not necessarily objective, and that they need help. They need structure, they need rules, and they need to understand how the mind works before they commit to paper or commit to computer screen a person's feedback and a performance score. Yeah, I think let's just take the hiring situation as an example. If I were advising hiring managers on how to make the best decision, the very first thing I would ask them is, what does it take to be successful at the job that you're hiring for? And if they say things like, oh, well, you need to be charismatic, you need to be a generally good problem solver, you really need to roll with the punches. Those are the sorts of things that are so ambiguous as to leave room for biased decision making. Instead, I want to know, what specific skills do you need to be successful? What kind of content area do you need to have a grasp for? Specifically, how do you apply a set of skills to the kinds of problems related to the job you're hiring for? That kind of detail is difficult to to actually articulate. It takes a lot of research to understand what people who are currently in the job actually do minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. But that is where you start. Without a thorough understanding of the job, it is impossible for you to hire the best candidate for that job. So once we have all of that groundwork laid, then we have to say, well, what are all the different ways that we can assess those capabilities, those knowledge, skills, and abilities amongst a whole set of candidates? And you need to be consistent. So if I have one person that I've interviewed, let's just say interviews is how I'm going to go about doing it, and then I have a great conversation with that person, I feel like I really get them, I ask them some questions, and then I have the next interview with the next person, and I modify my interview protocol a little bit to keep the conversation going, but afterwards I'm like, person 2 didn't really measure up to person 1. Well, unless I asked them both the same set of questions, I had a structured way of evaluating their responses, and everything that I asked them was tied to all that information I collected about the job, I would not trust the decision that that hiring manager would make. And so you need structure both on understanding the job and then structure on all the information we're collecting from candidates. And that is, IO psychologists are there to actually help people understand that process, to do the research to understand both the job and the candidate, and ultimately that will lead to a better hiring decision. People operations is what we call human resources at Google. It has an unconventional name because it has sort of an unconventional history. Google and other companies that are pretty recent that have started with unconventional ideals have a somewhat different way of approaching their organizational structure. So when it came to core HR related decisions, like how do we do hiring, how do we run the performance management process, how do we determine whom to promote, those are all things that we as a company developed together, and it didn't come from HR, it came from our engineers who had a voice, it came from our salespeople who had their ideas. And so in order to reflect the unconventional way that we were building a company, we chose people operations because we really, like our technology operations, like our sales operations, we're there to solve problems. We work side by side with all the other people in the company. So that is sort of how we got our name. What we actually do, there's a lot of stuff, and I sort of chunk up the main things that people operations is responsible for into 3 main categories. One is you can think of a set of products that we develop and deliver to the organization. Compensation. Everyone who works at Google gets a paycheck. We have to have a philosophy around pay. We have to have the infrastructure to actually pay people. So that's one of our products. Similarly, benefits. We have lots of things that we have medical benefits, we have retirement benefits, we've got all sorts of stuff that we have to create. We have to be responsive to the needs of Googlers, which is what we call Google employees, and then we roll those out. Now, that's our product side. Then we have sort of a service side, which is our HR business partners, our human resources business partners. These are the folks that work right alongside our leaders, right alongside our engineers, our salespeople, and helps them work through people-related problems. Not just problems, but opportunities and processes. How do we make sure that everyone's getting a performance evaluation? How do we ensure that managers who need a little extra help are actually getting it? That's what our HR business partners do. And then finally, we've got this third chunk, which some organizations might call like centers of excellence, but these are groups and people with really specialized skill sets in one of a small number of areas. For example, we've got amazing people who understand everything about workplace diversity, building diversity programs, working on culture change. We've got really amazing people who understand people development. So the assessment and development of leaders, ensuring that people have the feedback that they need to do their jobs well, designing and carrying out learning programs. If you want to learn a new skill, it comes through that group. And then the third group there is people analytics, which is the role that I'm in. And we're a group of researchers that assist every other part of HR to ensure that they're building the right programs, that it's based on science, and that we evaluate the impact of everything we're delivering to our employees to ensure that we're not just that we're spending our money wisely, but that we're incentivizing and helping Googlers behave in the way that helps them be productive and happy, helps their teams, and helps the organization overall thrive. Yeah, we're working in an amazing era, which is that technology actually helps us work across boundaries. So we can basically operate from any country in the world. We can open offices there, and you can work across the world. Now, the reason that's important is because talent is found everywhere. And Google has, we have a lot of software engineers with very specialized skill sets, and it's hard to find those people who can come in and work on the kinds of products we're developing. If we were restricted only to the United States, our growth as a company would be severely limited because talent is everywhere. So that is one of the benefits of of having an organization that's geographically distributed. Now, of course, that comes with certain challenges. Some of them are just pure challenges due to being on a spherical planet, which is time zones. The sun is only in a certain place at a certain time. And so at our most extreme sites, finding just a time to meet can be really difficult, and we have to be a bit flexible about when work gets done. Like, we can split it up in terms of we can divide responsibilities so that it gets covered almost on a 24-hour basis, or we can be a little bit more flexible, like meeting earlier, meeting later, that sort of thing. Now, the reason technically that we're able to work across distance, I believe, is because we have this amazing video technology. So I can, through my computer or through a dedicated device, actually see somebody when I talk to them. And there is information that gets communicated verbally. That's great. There's information that we can communicate via email. That's wonderful too. But there's for those of us who are capable of seeing, that visual cues, those nonverbals, are wonderful to form a connection, to get additional information. So that is how we do a lot of our meetings. We do Google Hangouts, and at any one time we could have like 4 windows open, 5, 10, however many locations might have a different window, and we can all collaborate with each other. I personally manage a team where several of the people that I manage are in California, even though I'm in New York, and we communicate daily via video. Another facilitator is actually just IMs, instant messages, or what we call here at Google pings. At any moment, it's almost like the equivalent of tapping someone on the shoulder and say, hey, can I ask you a quick question? All of these things facilitate the informal and the formal environment required to work effectively as a team. Now, the things that can be a real challenge are actually seeing somebody, talking to somebody in the micro kitchen, which is, gathering spots here at Google where they serve food. That can only happen when you're physically co-located with each other. And so we can come up with clever ways of getting around that. For example, in my own team meeting, I will always have a session of the team meeting that is for informal chit-chat. And I'm hoping that people will have those informal connections in the confines of the meeting when we're all connected via video, rather than waiting until the meeting is over and then they all migrate to the same location. But on the whole, I've been very impressed at humans' capability of doing work virtually just by using the technology that we have. I have no idea how they did it before we had video technology or reliable phone service. I'm guessing that the organizational world was a lot less global back then than it is today. So the first thing that I would like to say is that human resources, and specifically industrial organizational psychology and the principles you learn in that program are vital. Any organization, every organization, is simply the confluence of people working together. They're interacting with each other, they're sharing information, or they're not sharing information. They're exuding extra effort, or they're withholding effort. They're joining organizations, they're leaving organizations. And if you take any successful business idea and you can master all the human elements required to make that idea a reality, get people to coordinate their efforts, you can create a successful business. You can also take an amazing business idea and have dysfunctional norms, not understand how people interact with each other, not pay attention to leadership, and even though that could have been an amazing idea, the entire organizational system will fail. So I always think about business as the idea is a piece of it, but we're human beings working in coordination. And it's that insight that industrial organizational psychology as a profession gives you. And that's the value that I feel like I'm bringing to Google, is that insight into team dynamics, leadership dynamics, cooperation, working in a collaborative fashion. So do I use these principles every day on my job? Absolutely. And I do it in a couple of ways. One is just the content area. So, we talked a bit about performance appraisal. The design of those programs, we learn all about the theories of feedback, how people get information. We learn things like setting realistic, achievable goals can actually motivate performance. This is the content that I bring to the discussions around performance management. But you can also talk about designing a promotion system. You can even talk about the principles you're using to pay your employees. And is it good to differentiate pay based on performance? Is it good to pay everybody the same within a job band? Like, I have a perspective that's informed by theory and an understanding of human behavior, and I definitely use that every day. But the other piece of it is actually the ability to think scientifically. So to take a problem that is complicated and boil it down to its constituent parts and think about it piece by piece is something that I learned by reading all this literature and looking at, you take a Journal of Applied Psychology, an issue of the Journal of Applied Psychology, you read about the hypotheses, you really look at that methodology section in the results, and you can pick it apart, and then you can understand the fundamentals of how we build research. And then the last thing that I'll say that I think is really, really important, and I would not have gotten without being in an IO psychology program, is the understanding of designing research itself. So creating an intervention or creating a program that we will put employees through, designing it in a way that I have a treatment group and a control group, and then a measurement strategy. Whatever behavior I'm looking to influence, I know how to measure it, or if it's an attitude, or if it's commitment to a goal, I know how to measure that, and then see whether there are systematic differences between my treatment and between my control, and then using statistics to isolate all that variability that comes with being a human being and see if that intervention in and of itself drove more effective behaviors. Those are the tools that industrial organizational psychologists are trained to use, and they definitely have a place day to day in my job at Google.